This is the Crew Motorfest. We're here on Xbox Series S. Be sure to like the video. Subscribing is great as well. So here with the Crew, which is an open world take on driving and racing from Ubisoft. You know, there was the Crew 1 and 2, which are more about kind of going across the open world of the United States. This one is a bit of a spin-off where we head to Hawaii for a rather scenic and luxurious adventure. So what are we getting here? Only the single mode, which I guess you could sort of dub the quality mode. It's 1440p dynamic at 30 FPS. So that is a little disappointing in the sense that it would have been nice to have a 60 FPS mode. I think that's something a lot of people would have kind of almost preferred for this sort of experience. I mean, racing games just feel a lot better, you know, at 60 FPS, in my opinion. And it's like, yeah, you know, the game does look pretty good from a visual perspective, you know, in regards to the visual fidelity of the game. But yeah, that is a bit of a dropping in quality, in my opinion, going to 30 FPS. I've also noticed there does tend to be some little, I don't know, it just seems like either like a bit of tearing and or kind of like some little drops here or there on the Series S version. But yeah, you do get a decently good visual presentation and experience. So, I don't know, again, it would have been nice to have a 60 FPS mode. I will say that visually I think this looks nice from the Series S, but it's not necessarily pushing any boundaries, and it would have been nice to see them try to do something lower with a higher frame rate. But I think a lot of the game is the, you know, visual ambience, the style, the aesthetic of it, and I think when you do have, you know, that sort of change up going to 60 on the Series S, usually we do lose a lot of fidelity to make that possible, so I can see why they went with this sort of concept for the game. It's just like, I'm trying to, like, you know, come up with kind of ideas as to why we're not seeing that higher frame rate mode, because if you're on the Series X, you do get both modes, right? You do get that that basically like full 4K, and you get that dynamic resolution option, but you get that higher frame rate, and it still looks really good. So, little disappointing we couldn't quite get that with this particular offering. So, the cool thing about the Crew, if you're not familiar with that series, is that at any point you can switch between differing disciplines of racing. So, you know, you could be driving, and then you could be in a plane, then you can be in a boat. Really that instantly, that quick. Seriously, just on the fly, you could switch between them. And, you know, you're on an island of Hawaii, like I mentioned, and it's a large place. There's lots to see. You know, the day-night cycles matched with random bits of weathering and weather conditions and whatnot. Like, yeah, it's a pretty big space. They use it effectively. They spread out these different things, and you're going through these activities called playlists. And I think there's like, I believe the final count was something like 16 I did, and these playlists, they're all about an hour, maybe sometimes up to 2 hours long, and they all have like a story to tell. They all have like a concept that they're going towards, and they all do something a little bit different. Like, there's one that focuses on Lamborghinis, there's one that focuses on essentially like the history of like the Porsche 911 and stuff like that. So you get a variety of different playlists that focus on different elements of cars. You know, there's like one that's a little bit about drifting. It is a little bit disappointing though that, like, if you're into the boats, you're into the planes, those are quite largely thrown aside. They're stuffed into like one playlist, and they show up a little bit in the scenic tours. I recommend doing the scenic tours right off the bat, because the scenic tours will allow you to essentially get like a plane and a boat for quicker traveling, because fast traveling doesn't come until you unlock finish a bunch of playlists, which can be a little annoying for grinding elements. So yeah, the playlists are pretty good. You know, they all do their different thing. Some have a little bit more dynamic elements than others do, but I think they do offer something you know, a little bit unique that you can work towards and work through. And then there's like these larger scale multiplayer battles that you can do as well. It's like there's challenges as well for each of the different areas where you get rewards. But they've got like these overall thematic events, like ground races, which are like large scale multiplayer things, demolition races as well. And then there's like this main stage, sort of live competition circuit that's going on all the time. And if it's anything like the level of like the Crew 2, you know, this is something that's likely to get supported for a long time. And I would imagine we'll see more and more playlists and more options and stuff added to the game over time to kind of, you know, keep players interested in the experience. So, you know, this is definitely something I can see where at launch, you know, there's a good chunky element of gameplay, right? Like there's all those playlists, there's the challenges, the supplementary events, you know, random in-world events, multiplayer stuff, you know, interacting with others, just driving by yourself and doing various races. Like, you know, there is a lot to this game. I wish we weren't driving at night, but, you know, you kind of almost get what you get for conditions in this game, right? Because it's just sort of a lock thing, and it changes over time. So I'm kind of racing towards a race that we can do and showcase something a little bit different. I also love that thematically the playlists also have all their own little vibes. Like the vintage that we're doing has a bit of a throwback sort of aesthetic, and then if you do American Muscle, it's a bit of a, you know, showcase on particular like American muscle vehicles, and you know, you get like different types of vehicles. So there's something like over 600 vehicles that are present, and you can import vehicles if you have progression in like the Crew 2, which is kind of cool. And then, you know, the Scenic Tours is like a really slow kind of vibe. Whereas the Porsche and like the motorsports racing is a lot more of like a serious kind of like, hey, you got to do things properly kind of race. You're not supposed to damage the cars. We were doing the electric vehicles there, and the electric vehicles are funny because like they're very fragile, which is just kind of entertaining. But it's such a cool like art aesthetic and backdrop. Like they really do fancy up each of the terrains. And a great shout out to Ubisoft for having a streamer mode within this game. It's really cool for, you know, not having to deal with like music issues, so that's something that I personally quite like. But yeah, you get a bunch of different ways that you can interact with the races, and a bunch of different races you can do. It's essentially like the Crew meets Forza Horizon, and like they do not shy away from that in the slightest. Like they lean heavily into the fact that like, hey, we're like kind of looking to emulate that sort of visual experience in regards to like the styling, the feel, the enthusiasm of the event. Like you drop in from like an opening thing, you do your character customization, they give you a slice of life of the island, and then you're kind of free to do whatever. Like some of the playlists do require you to buy, you know, certain vehicles, and there's lots of differing tiers of like difficulty setups, so you can be like, oh, I need to make this a little easier, oh, I need to make this a little bit harder. You know, that choice is really quite up to you, from that element of being like, I can make this as hardcore or as easygoing as I want to, and that's kind of nice. And as I was mentioning, the different slices of life, you know, Hawaii has more biomes than like sandy beaches. Like I'm sure you're sitting there being like, oh, you know, sand resorts, that's what this game is. But there's actually quite a lot to it. You know, there's jungles, and there's like these mountainous top areas, and there's this volcanic ash places, and, you know, open kind of farmlands with like pineapples and stuff. Like, and then you've got like the cities too. So the cities all have varying elements of like density to them, and varying elements of basically liveliness, so that they feel as though they are areas that actually are kind of lived in to a degree, right? I mean, it's also a game where your main aspect of what you're doing is driving and racing, so, you know, it is more for backdrop aesthetics, but, you know, that aspect is actually present and alive there. You feel like you're driving through places that are alive. You feel like you're visiting a recreation of the Hawaiian landscape and enjoying that. And then the playlists also have elements that teach you a little bit about some of the cultural stuff locally. You know, you do learn a bit about the history and whatnot, and some of your tour guides will be a little bit more in-depth in that regard too, right? Just kind of showcasing certain experiences and whatnot. So I think they've actually put together something pretty nice. It does feel like a refined version, handling and physics and stuff, in comparison to what we got with, the Crew 2. So I think that has been refined a little bit. But if you're coming from the Crew, you're gonna feel, at home, right? It's gonna come across as being a spin-off, sort of standalone expansion. It is its full own game. There is a lot of gameplay to it, but it does also come across as, hey, we've got the core gameplay mechanics. Let's just whip up a more Forza Horizon-esque sort of scenario and setup. So it's a solid racing game. It is fun. It does have a lot to do. It is technically, I was kind of hoping we could go right through that. It is technically impressive to a degree. I mean, on the Series S, obviously, it leaves a little bit to be desired in regards to fluidity levels, but, you kind of get what you get, and at least this one does look aesthetically pleasing, and it doesn't seem like they fully had to cut things back. I mean, it's not, it's not at the visual levels that we were getting for either quality or performance on the Series X side of things, but it's still visually pretty good looking, especially in comparison to quite a few of the Series S kind of titles and stuff that I've seen over the years. It is a visually nicer looking one, so that in itself is kind of really nice to see. And then the driving, is kind of fun, and you get a different sense of speed for the different vehicles you have, and I think it works. Like, it really does have some fun vibes to it. It does have some nice, easygoing racing stuff. If you're kind of waiting for a new Horizon, this is kind of a nice tie over, in my opinion. I think it's sort of, when it loads really nice and fast too, like all the events you're right into right away. But it is a nice tie over in regards to preparing for what eventually will be another Horizon entry down the road, and more faults and whatnot, and it fills voids and niches in other places, and it's another open world racing game. We don't have a bazillion of them. Like, there is a growing selection of racing games that are open world, but it's still not super busy. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of genres of games that are super flooded. For racing, it still seems like a lot of what we get is circuit based, right? And we're just seeing more options for open world, and I think that's nice. And the clarity is really good on this too. Like, you do get a good sense of draw distance. I mean, I think perhaps you see some elements of the pop-in that are kind of present, but yeah, this is not a terrible way to experience the Crew Motorfest. I do hope that maybe they consider doing a higher frame rate mode down the road. I would assume the fact that they didn't for the launch, they didn't have that in the beta and stuff, kind of means that it's not really a priority or of interest to them. And I also think that just kind of what I'm seeing here at 1440p, I believe if you did want to get a higher frame rate, you would really have to make some deeper cuts to the visuals and stuff, to the degree that I'm kind of pondering if it's fully worth doing that, as I've definitely noticed some, levels of performance hiccups and stuff while we're playing anyways, and it's, 30 FPS isn't necessarily the highest of bounds. So I'd say, as I basically had mentioned, is visually this is good for the Series S. Performance-wise, it's pretty smooth. It looks good. I think this is a decent showcase of this console. Frame rate-wise, yeah, I'd love to have 60 FPS. I don't know if the console could really do it after kind of, sitting in here and playing it for a bit. I do ponder technically if that is possible, or if there would be a lot of issues in trying to do such a thing. But it's a neat idea, because there is, it's targeting 1440 and it's dynamic, and, there's a bit of a room to drop to try to get that frame rate, but, what are you sacrificing, and is it going to be something that's even visually sort of worth looking into? And the reflections on the cars are really rough on the Series S. They look a lot a lot nicer on the Series X side of things. The reflective elements of vehicles and whatnot. So I'd say, you know, for me, this game is fun. It's enjoyable. You know, it's a pretty decent to great open world racing game. It doesn't really reinvent the wheel. It doesn't really do anything wildly new. It doesn't really blow my mind, but you know, it's fun. It's enjoyable. Gets the job done. It's a fine racing offering that actually has a lot of content to it. I think from a content perspective, you won't be really disappointed in how much you get out of this for hours and stuff. Like, those playlists can be pretty chunky, and there is a good selection of them, and then there's all the challenge stuff and all the other, you know, open world events, the multiplayer stuff. Like, there is a lot to enjoy in this game. There really genuinely is a lot that you can dive into. And I can't speak for the future of the title, but, you know, they are typically games that do have a healthy amount of post-launch content to them for support and growth, and I could see this one growing even more and offering even more potential gameplay that you could enjoy down the road. But yeah, it's got nice vibes, it's got a cool atmosphere. Really, Mary, they're coming to beat me right at the end. Are you for real, Mary? Where did you even... Are you serious? Like, you know, I'm leading, like, most of the race, and then the Mary just, like, comes out of nowhere, just supersedes me there. Unbelievable. I can't even with Mary sometimes. I'm just like, why would you do that? Can you believe that? Like, right at the end that happened. But yeah, you're earning points, you're able to buy more cars, there's different, like, upgrades you can get for your vehicles. You know, the races are going to vary based on, like, how fast you are and how efficient you are, what you're doing. But yeah, it's a lengthy experience. It's a fairly large open world. There's lots to do. There's lots to see. You can have a lot of fun playing. On the Series S, there's not anything too critically crazy. You do get what feels largely like the full scope of the experience. You know, I think some things from a visual perspective are toned down, you know, outside the fluidity, but hey, it's not bad. You know, it's the Series S is kind of continuing to be fun surprises. Like, whenever I jump on this console, I literally never know what I'm gonna get. I never know what's gonna happen. So I'm always intrigued to see what the end result is for this experience. You know what I mean? Just what we eventually end up with, where they have to make changes, where they have to make drawbacks, and it's always such a mix. Sometimes it's like, wow, they really went all out for the Series S, and sometimes I wanted to rewind. So yeah, that was a bit of a weird infinite loading situation that happened there. That was a bit odd, and I don't really know what that was all about. That was a bit strange, because usually, you know, I just kind of the Y button does a rewind, so that was kind of a bit odd. Anyways, moving past that, I just restarted the game, and now we're diving back into the experience and going over what I was chatting about. Yeah, the Crew Motorfest, I think, is a pretty well put together pile of content. You know, it's something that I think does fill that kind of niche of being like, hey, you know, I've been kind of missing the whole Forza Horizon vibe. I need something a little bit different. Coming from the Crew 2, I think you'll be right at home. You'll be like, okay, cool, new place to visit, new place to see, you know, different style of, you know, basically the aesthetics, the atmosphere, and the playlists. And it is still kind of on brand with the series, because as I had mentioned earlier, you know, the Crew is largely about the concept of driving across the, you know, America. And Hawaii does fit and fill into that sort of thing, I think, pretty effectively, still on par. And that does make me wonder if they'll try more spin-offs and, you know, locations and whatnot down the road, or if this is just going to be kind of a quick sort of one-off thing before they go back to, you know, the stylings that they have been doing in the past. So it should be interesting. I like this one. It's fine. It's fun. You know, it gives you a lot to do. Series S version, it's not so bad visually, but obviously frame rate feels a lot better. It feels so much slower compared to what I'm used to on the Series X. but not a bad turnout for the little console again. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with this game long term, I will say for sure.